voicemail was 47 seconds long. I know because I played it 11 times that first night, lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of Northwestern Memorial, my son asleep in the bassinet beside me, my stitches pulling every time I reached for the phone. Hey, so, I know the timing's bad. My mom's situation, the lawyers, the estate stuff in Phoenix. It's blowing up and I have to deal with it, and honestly, a hospital room with a screaming newborn is not a place where I can think. Your mom said she'd come up from Naperville. That's better anyway. Babies need grandmas. I'll call when things settle. Don't make this a whole thing. That was it. No, I love you. No name for the baby we'd supposedly chosen together. He didn't even say my name. 3 days after I gave birth, my husband left me a voicemail from the parking garage of the hospital. I checked the location stamp later. He was 9 floors below me when he recorded it. And then he drove away in the car that still had the infant seat in it. The nurse found me listening to it for the 12th time and asked if I wanted her to call someone. I said no thank you, and I asked for the discharge paperwork, and I asked whether the hospital had a notary on staff. She looked at me like I'd asked for a glass of wine. But I learned a long time ago that the moment everything falls apart is the moment you start writing things down. My mother drove up from Naperville that afternoon in her old Camry with a casserole on the passenger seat, because in my family grief and lasagna are the same food group. She walked into that room, saw the empty chair where a husband should have been, and her whole face just collapsed. Then it rebuilt itself into something I'd never seen on her before, something with teeth. Where is he? Gone. There's a voicemail. She listened to it once, standing by the window, one hand pressed flat against her sternum, like she was holding her own heart in place. Then she set my phone down very carefully on the tray table, the way you set down something you'd otherwise throw. Your father is going to kill him. I mean that as a scheduling concern. Nobody's killing anybody, Mom. Then we're calling a lawyer, today. Child support, abandonment, all of it. I watched the shows, honey. I know they have a word for this. We're not calling a lawyer. And here's where I have to stop and tell you something about myself, because you're going to hear the rest of this story, and you're going to need to decide how you feel about me, and I'd rather you decide based on the truth. I'm 31 years old. Before the baby, I spent 7 years as a forensic accountant at a mid-size firm in the Loop. The person companies hire when money goes missing and they want to know exactly which hand took it. I am very good at reading documents. I am very good at reading people who think they're smarter than documents. And when I met my husband 4 years earlier at a charity gala neither of us could really afford to be at, I did what I do with everything. I ran the numbers. His last name was on hotels. You've stayed in one, probably. There are 140 of them across the country, the kind with the good lobbies and the better bars, all of it built over 40 years by his mother. A woman who started with one failing motor lodge outside Tucson that she bought at auction at 26 and turned into a $2 billion hospitality group. She was famous in a quiet way. The kind of rich where you're not in the tabloids, you're in the bond ratings. And her only son was famous in certain Chicago circles. For one thing, she had cut him off, completely, publicly, 5 years before I met him. He'd been a regional VP in the company, a job she handed him, and he'd been caught inflating contractor invoices and pocketing the spread, almost $900,000 over 3 years, skimmed from his own mother. She didn't prosecute, she did something worse, by his lights. She announced his departure in a 2-line press release, removed him from every trust she legally could, and left him exactly one thing, a small annuity, about $4,000 a month, structured so it couldn't be borrowed against, sold, or accelerated, enough to keep him from ever being her embarrassment on a street corner. Not enough to be anyone. I knew all of this before our second date. I want to be honest about that. I sat in my apartment with a glass of grocery store Cabernet and I pulled the press coverage, the property records, the court filing from the one contractor who'd sued. I read his mother's last 3 shareholder letters. I read a commencement speech she gave in 2019 where she said, and I'm paraphrasing, that legacy is the only honest measure of a life. and that she had spent 40 years building one with no one to leave it to. No one to leave it to. I read that line and I sat very still for a long time. So when my mother stood in that hospital room saying lawyer, 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 I told her to sit down, and I told her the thing I had never told anyone, and I watched my own mother look at me like a stranger. I knew what he was before I married him, I said. I knew he was weak and vain and allergic to consequences. I married him anyway. I got pregnant on purpose, not by accident, not by hoping. I planned it down to the cycle. Why in God's name? Because his mother has no heir. The words came out flat and clean, and saying them out loud for the first time was like stepping off a ledge. He's an only child. She's 68. There is a $2 billion company and a foundation, and no one to leave it to except a son she despises. My plan was simple. A grandchild fixes everything. A grandchild gives her a reason to bring him back into the fold, and he goes back in as a father, a family man, redeemed, and we all rise together. I wasn't trying to fix him, Mom. Everybody thinks women like me are trying to fix men like him. I was trying to use him as a bridge. The room was so quiet I could hear my son breathing, little raspy newborn breaths, like a paper bag opening and closing. And he burned the bridge, my mother said finally. Her voice was hollow. He burned the bridge. I overestimated him. I genuinely believed that even he wouldn't run from his own child, that the pull of finally pleasing her would be enough to make him show up and play the part. I was wrong. He's a worse coward than I budgeted for. So it's over. The whole scheme, it's over. No, I said, and I looked at the bassinet, at the tiny fist curled up by a tiny ear. It just skips a step. I don't need the bridge anymore. I'll go to her directly. My mother actually laughed, one sharp, horrified bark. She'll think you're a gold digger. Mom, I was so tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bone marrow. I am a gold digger. Let's not insult each other. But I'm a gold digger, holding the only thing on this earth that woman cannot buy, build, or acquire in a hostile takeover. A grandson, clean, brand new, carrying her name's blood with none of her son's record. I'm not going to her with my hand out. I'm going to her with an asset she doesn't know she has. My mother cried then, and not the proud kind of crying. I let her. I deserved it. And underneath all my arithmetic, there was a hot wire of guilt running straight down through me into that bassinet. Because the asset had eyelashes now, and hiccups, and a way of turning toward my voice like a plant turning toward a window. I had made him as a move on a board. He had arrived as a person. I was going to have to live inside that contradiction for the rest of my life, and I knew it, 3 days in, lying in that bed. I named him Micah. My husband never even asked. He called once, 11 days later. I was on my parents' couch with a heating pad and a breast pump and the particular self-loathing of 3 a.m. and the phone lit up with a number I didn't know. Las Vegas area code. Hey, it's me. Bar noise behind him. Glass and laughter and a TV with a game on. The estate emergency in Phoenix apparently had a happy hour. Look, things are still crazy out here, but I'm gonna send some money soon, okay? How's everything? His name is Micah. Right. Yeah, Micah. We said maybe that one, right? We had never said that one. I sat there with the phone against my ear and I felt the very last thread between us, thin and rotten as old fishing line, and I cut it. Don't send money. Don't call. The next communication you get from me will be served by someone in a cheap suit, and after that, nothing. You made a choice in a parking garage. I'm just formalizing it. Okay, wow, hostile. I hung up. I blocked the number. Then I opened my laptop, and while my son slept against my chest in a wrap my aunt had crocheted, I started building the file. This is the part where I tell you that I did not write a letter to a billionaire on a whim. I prepared for 4 months the way I used to prepare for fraud depositions. I read every public filing her company had made in a decade. I read the bylaws of her foundation, which funds, and this stopped my breath when I found it, literacy programs and college scholarships for kids growing up without fathers. I found the profile from years back where the interviewer asked about succession, and she said, "The company will outlive my mistakes," and the writer noted that she looked out the window for a long moment afterward. I learned that she'd been widowed at 39, never remarried, that she answered her own correspondence, that she fired people for being late, but never for being wrong, and that every January she flew commercial to Tucson and spent one day alone at the site of the motor lodge where it all started, which is a parking lot now. A lonely, brutal, self-made woman with a dead husband, a disgraced son, and a legacy with no name on the next line. I didn't email. Email gets screened and deleted. I bought heavy cream stationery from a shop on Michigan Avenue, and with the 4-month-old finally asleep down the hall, I wrote 5 sentences in my best handwriting. I told her she had a grandson. I told her his name and his birthday. I told her that her son had been informed of his existence and had declined in writing to be involved, and that a copy of that writing was enclosed along with the birth certificate and one photograph. I told her I was asking for nothing and that this letter was simply a notification because I believed she had a right to know that her line had not ended. I signed my full name. I included an email address I'd created just for this. And I mailed it, certified, return receipt, not to corporate headquarters where it would die in a mailroom, but to the small family office in Scottsdale whose address I'd dug out of a 15-year-old property transfer. Dropping it through the post office slot felt like releasing something guided and armed. I'd aimed it as well as any human being could aim. After that, it was physics. 9 days. Then the email account I built chimed at 6:40 on a Tuesday morning. It was from her attorney, a woman whose signature block was longer than the message. The message was 2 sentences. Mrs. Crane requests a meeting at her residence in Scottsdale. A paternity test, conducted by a laboratory of her choosing, will be a precondition of any further contact. I wrote back 1 sentence. "We're available any week you choose, and we'd have insisted on the test if you hadn't." I'm told much later by someone who was in the room that when she read that reply, she snorted and said, "Well, at least this one can write." The house outside Scottsdale was low and long, desert-colored, the kind of architecture that costs more the simpler it looks. I flew out when Micah was 6 months old on my own savings. I want that on the record. I paid for the flights. I have never once let her pay for a single thing without paper behind it. Her attorney met us at the door and walked us down a hallway hung with photographs of hotels, decades of them, and not one single photograph of a human being. She was waiting in a room with a wall of glass facing the mountains. 68 years old, steel gray hair cut short and blunt, reading glasses pushed up on her head, dressed like she had a site inspection after this. She did not get up. She looked at me the way I imagined she looked at distressed properties, foundation to roofline, one pass, cataloging every defect. "You're the wife." "I'm his mother," I said, and nodded at Micah, who was gnawing on his own fist in the carrier on my chest. "The wife part is being dissolved in Cook County as we speak. You understand what I think this is?" "I'd be disappointed in you if you didn't think that." Her eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch. I kept going, because I had rehearsed this in the shower for 4 months and I was not going to waste my one swing. "You think I'm here for money, so let me save us both a year of fencing. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois. My father drove a forklift for 31 years. My mother did medical billing at a kitchen table. I have a finance degree I'm still paying for, and a career I'm good at, and a son whose father recorded his resignation from fatherhood in a parking garage. I didn't come here to cry on your rug. I came because you built something for 40 years, and there is now exactly one person alive who can carry it past you, and he just learned to sit up by himself last week. What you do with that information is entirely your business. I've done my part by delivering it." The silence went on so long I could hear the air conditioning. Then Micah sneezed, one of those full-body baby sneezes that startle them, and burst out laughing at himself, that helpless gurgling baby laugh. And I watched something move across that woman's face like wind across water, there and gone. The test first, she said, then we'll see. The test came back the way we all knew it would, and then began the strangest apprenticeship of my life. She didn't embrace us. There was no scene from a movie, no tears, no nursery wing unveiled. What she offered, through her attorney, was this: 1 visit a month at the house and a trust for Micah's medical care and education. Modest by her standards, with me as custodian and an annual accounting required. A test, in other words. She wanted to see what I'd do with money that had strings and witnesses. So I did exactly what a forensic accountant would do. I documented everything. Every dollar from that trust went to pediatrician bills and, eventually, preschool. And every quarter I sent her office a reconciliation she never asked for, down to the cent, with receipts attached. I kept working, remote, then part-time consulting, and I paid our rent and our groceries myself. And I made sure she could see that too. I never asked for an upgrade on the flights. I never once said the word "we" about her money. Month after month, we flew to the desert. And month after month, in a sunroom with toys that her assistant grudgingly procured, the hardest woman in American hospitality got down on a tile floor with my son. It happened by inches. The first year, she mostly observed him like a line item. The second year, he started talking, and that was the end of her. Micah at 2 was a serious, watchful little person. My eyes, her jaw, and an engineer's compulsion to find out how everything worked. He'd flip her reading glasses open and shut, frowning like an inspector. One visit, he spent 40 minutes trying to figure out the latch on her briefcase, and she sat there the entire time and let him. And when it finally clicked open, he looked up at her with pure triumph, and she said, "Good, you didn't quit," in the exact tone I'd heard her use on an earnings call. She started teaching him things. Not grandma things. She taught him to count by stacking sugar packets. At 4, she walked him through the lobby of her flagship property downtown and asked him what he noticed. And he said the lady at the desk looked tired, and his grandmother stopped walking and looked at him for a long second and said, "Yes. That's the whole business, right there. You just said it." That night, her attorney called me. There was a new amendment to her estate plan. Micah was now a primary beneficiary. I would serve as sole trustee of his interests until he turned 25. She asked me to relay something verbatim, the attorney said, and I could hear her choosing to be careful. She said, "Tell her she's done this correctly, so far." From her, I'd learn that was a sonnet. I'd be lying if I said the household welcomed me. Her longtime assistant treated me like a contagious disease for 2 solid years. I once came back from the restroom in time to hear her tell the cook, "Mark my words, that girl is playing the longest game I've ever seen." I stepped around the corner and asked, pleasantly, whether we were in the sunroom or the office today. I never reported it. I didn't have to. 6 months later, the assistant took an early retirement she did not appear to have planned, and her replacement treated me with the flawless neutrality of a man who has read a memo. And the woman herself never softened toward me, exactly. What grew between us was stranger than affection. She started, in year 3, asking me questions back. I'd mention an article and she'd say, "And what did you think of their occupancy math?" Testing. I stopped pretending to be smaller than I am because she clearly found it irritating, and I told her their occupancy math was a fairy tale and showed her why, and after that the monthly visits grew a second hour. After Micah's nap, that was essentially a seminar. She'd slide a deal memo across the table and say, "Find the lie." I always found the lie. It's the one thing I've never failed at. "You read documents like a creditor," she told me once, almost approvingly. "I read them like someone who's been left holding a note," I said, and she laughed. A short, rusted sound, like a gate that hadn't swung in years. 5 years. That's how long the peace lasted. 5 years of desert flights and sugar packet mass and quarterly reconciliations, and my son turning from an asset into the entire architecture of my heart. I want to be honest about that too, because it's the part I never planned. The plan had a child in it. The plan did not have Micah, the specific person who sleeps with one foot outside the blanket and apologizes to furniture when he bumps it. Whatever I deserve for how he started, what I feel for him is the one true thing in this whole story. Everything else I built. Him, I just love. Then, on an ordinary Thursday, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment in Chicago, and the past stood up out of its grave wearing a new suit. The letterhead belonged to a law firm I'd never heard of, the strip mall kind. Inside was a petition. My ex-husband, address listed as Henderson, Nevada, was seeking joint custody of Micah, alleging that I had alienated him from his son, and attached as Exhibit A was a document I had never seen in my life, a typed co-parenting agreement dated back to the year Micah was born, in which I supposedly acknowledged his ongoing involvement and support bearing, at the bottom my signature, a signature I had never signed. I sat at my kitchen table, and I felt the cold come down over me like it did in that hospital bed, that pilot after ejection calm, and underneath it, something new and feral, because this wasn't about me. He had found out. Of course he had found out. His mother made no secret of her grandson. They'd been photographed at a children's museum gala the previous spring. Somewhere in Henderson, a 41-year-old man with a $4,000 annuity had done the math on a $2 billion estate and realized that the child he abandoned in a parking garage had appreciated in value. He wasn't suing for his son. He was suing for a seat at the reading of a will. I called the desert. Her assistant put me through in under a minute, which had never happened before. He's filed, I said, custody petition, Cook County, and he's manufactured evidence. There's a forged agreement with my signature on it. A silence. Then her voice, and I'd heard that voice do cold, but I had never heard this. He came to me first, 8 months ago, called the office, said he'd changed, said he was ready to come home and take his rightful place. She said rightful place the way you'd hold up something dead by the tail. I had him told that his rightful place was wherever I am not. I assumed that was the end of it. I underestimated his nerve. That was always your department. You budgeted for his cowardice better than I did. He'll lose, I said, but it'll take a year and he'll drag Micah through it. Evaluations, guardians ad litem. No. One syllable, final as a gavel. He will not get within a county of that child. Come out here this weekend. Bring everything. And bring the part of you that finds the lie. What happened over the next 5 months, I can only describe as a quiet, methodical demolition, and I held one of the hammers. Because here's what my ex-husband had forgotten. In all his years of remembering me as the boring wife with the spreadsheets, forgery is a document crime, and documents are my native country. I sat in a conference room with her attorneys and took that fake agreement apart like a watch. The font was a Microsoft default that didn't ship until 2 years after the document's date. The notary stamp belonged to a notary whose commission, per the Nevada Secretary of State's public database, hadn't been issued until 18 months after he supposedly stamped it. And my signature, my alleged signature, was traced from the only document he still possessed bearing my real one, our marriage license. I proved it with an overlay. It matched to the millimeter, and no two genuine signatures ever do. People don't sign their name the same way twice. Tracers do. His attorney withdrew from the case 11 days after our response brief landed. Smart man. And then his mother did the thing I will think about for the rest of my life. She didn't just get the petition dismissed. Her lawyers referred the forged instrument, the fraudulent notarization, and the perjured affidavit to the state's attorney, turned her own son in with exhibits tabbed and a cover letter, and then she instructed them to offer him a deal, one time only. Sign a voluntary termination of parental rights, consent to a permanent no-contact order covering me, Micah, and her, and the family would not push for prosecution beyond whatever the state chose to do on its own. And tell him, she said, in that conference room, not raising her voice at all, that the annuity continues either way. $4,000 a month, every month, for the rest of his life. He'll sit in whatever city he lands in, and every month that deposit will arrive, and it will never, ever grow, and he will know exactly what his name was worth. He took the deal in 9 days. The state prosecuted the forgery anyway. Turns out we weren't the first paper he'd faked. Just the first family who knew what kerning was. And he served 14 months, minimum security. And that was that. No car chases, no screaming on a doorstep. He came back after all those years, and the moment he stepped into our lives, he lost it. Lost the custody bid. Lost the leverage. Lost the last threadbare claim to a legacy he'd been pawning since he was 30. He lost it all to the wife who read documents and the mother who wrote them. There's a version of this story where I'm sorry about that. This is not that version. Micah asked about him exactly once that year. He was 6 in the bath, frowning at a tugboat. Is my dad a bad guy? I'd rehearsed lawyer answers for that question for 6 years. I used none of them. He's a weak guy, I said. Weak guys can do bad guy things when they're scared. He was scared of being a dad, so he left, and that hurt me, and it wasn't fair to you. But look at the size of the family that stayed. Count it for me. And he did. Me, Nana, Pop, his grandmother, the dog his grandmother absolutely denied buying him. Counting on wet fingers, and somewhere around 6 he got distracted by the tugboat, the way 6-year-olds mercifully do. His grandmother is 80 now. She did not die tragically in the 3rd act of my life. She would consider that an inefficient use of her time. What she did instead, 2 years ago, was call me into the room with the mountain view, slide a folder across the table, and say, "Find the lie." I read it. It was a succession plan. It named her as executive chair, stepping back over 5 years. It named a chief executive from inside the company. And it named me, the forklift driver's daughter from Naperville, to her board of directors, and a standing trustee of the family's voting shares until Micah turns 25. There's no lie in this one, I finally said. No, she said. First document I've ever drafted without one. Took me 40 years. She looked out at the mountains and then at me, and her voice did the thing it almost never does, where the steel gets thin enough to see light through. You came to my door 8 years ago and told me you weren't asking for anything. That was the lie, you know. You were asking for everything. You just intended to earn it. She tapped the folder once. You were the worst thing my son ever did and the best decision I never made. Don't make me regret the paperwork. I won't. It's the family motto now, more or less. Last month, on a Sunday, I watched her teach my son 9 years old, serious as an auditor, one sock perpetually falling down, how to read a profit and loss statement at her kitchen table, the two of them frowning identically at the margins, and my mother, visiting from Naperville, leaned over to me with her coffee and whispered, "You know, when you told me your plan in that hospital, I thought I'd raised a monster." And now? She watched them for a while. Micah caught an error in the statement. His grandmother had planted one, she always plants one, and pointed at it, and the old woman slapped the table in genuine delight, and my mother smiled in a complicated way that I've earned every wrinkle of. Now I think you were a girl with nothing, who looked at a man with nothing, and somehow built all of this out of it. I still don't know if it was wrong. I've decided I don't have to know. Neither do I, most days. I started this as a calculation. I've never pretended otherwise. Not to my mother, not to his, not to you. I picked a weak man on purpose. I made a child as a strategy. The strategy failed in week 1, and the child became my whole life, and the empire I schemed my way toward turned out to come with a fierce, impossible, 80-year-old woman who I would now walk through fire for, and who plants errors in spreadsheets for my son the way other grandmothers hide chocolate. The plan got me in the door. It bought nothing that's actually in the house. Some nights, after Mike is asleep with his foot outside the blanket, I still think about that voicemail. 47 seconds, recorded 9 floors beneath us by a man who thought he was escaping a burden. He never understood what he left in that hospital room. He thought it was a trap. It was a fortune. It just wasn't his. Some nights I still pull up that voicemail in my head, all 47 seconds of it, and I no longer hear a man leaving. I hear a man choosing. That's the thing about this whole story that took me years to see clearly. Nothing in it happened to anyone. Everything in it was chosen, and every choice came due, with interest, exactly on schedule. My husband chose the easy exit from a hospital parking garage, and 5 years later that same choice walked into a courtroom wearing his signature and convicted him. He didn't lose his son in that custody hearing. He lost him in those 47 seconds, 9 floors beneath us. The court just did the paperwork. When he traced my name off our marriage license, he wasn't committing a new sin. He was repeating the old one, taking a shortcut instead of doing the work. And shortcuts always lead back to the same address. The forgery didn't destroy him. It revealed him. Causes don't forget. They wait. And I have to hold my own choices up to that same light, because I started this with hands that weren't clean. I picked a weak man on purpose. I planned a child like a transaction. So why did my road bend toward a kitchen table where my son learned spreadsheets from his grandmother, while his road bent toward a no-contact order? I've thought about it for 9 years, and here's the honest answer. Somewhere along the way, I started doing the right thing even when no one was checking. Every receipt I sent Mrs. Crane that she never asked for. Every flight I paid for myself. Every dollar of that trust that went exactly where it was supposed to go. I built a record of integrity, one boring, unglamorous decision at a time, and when the day came that a forged document said I was a liar, 8 years of paper stood up and said otherwise. Character isn't a feeling. It's a file. You build it daily, or you don't have it when you need it. The mind matters too. I would have lost that case if I hadn't spent 7 years learning how documents lie, and Mrs. Crane built $2 billion by understanding people one room at a time. But I've watched clever people destroy themselves, my ex-husband included. He was never stupid. He was lazy. Brains without the grind are just a faster way to fail. What saved Micah and me wasn't one brilliant move. It was 4 months of research before one letter, 5 years of monthly flights with a baby on my chest, quarterly reconciliations nobody required, the willingness to keep showing up, sore and tired and unsure, long after the dramatic part was over. So when my son is old enough, I'll tell him all of it, the calculation and the grace, and I'll tell him what I believe the whole mess proved. Do right when it costs you. Sharpen your mind like it's the only inheritance that can't be contested. And outlast everyone who's counting on you to quit. His father had every advantage and none of those 3 things. His grandmother and I had nothing else. Look how it ended.